Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 19 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. Blue Jay here with Jay and T250. This week, we're going to break down a few things, of course, starting off with the OPL shutting down. We will also get into other things. We're going to do a quick recap of the group stage. We're going to try to be a little bit shorter on that this week. We went a little bit long last week, and there wasn't too many crazy things that happened, so we're going to be a little bit shorter on that. And then we're going to talk about, obviously, we're going to preview the quarterfinals coming up. And there's one other thing that I'm missing, but we will get to whatever the hell it is. Let's just get right into it because we do have a few things to talk about. Let's talk about the OPL. Last week, literally right at the end of our episode, there was like an announcement that the OPL was shutting down for good. And we wish we could have had it in last week's episode, but of course, I mean, we can't control that. And so we did want to get to it this week. Any initial thoughts on that, JNT?
Yeah, I think it was pretty surprising news considering that, the OPL had just done, a pretty decent job at the playing tournament. Really, they had a very good group stage and lost to LGD, a Chinese team, in a best of five. So I think this is the best that OPL has ever done. And then followed up by an announcement that their league is going to be permanently shutting down, was, I think, it caught most people off guard.
Yeah, it really did. The thing is, I think there was word over the last couple of years that the OPL wasn't doing great as far wasn't doing great financially. And there was talks about like reducing budget for the OPL and all, and just basically the office in Australia. However, I don't think there was any talk about it shutting down, or at least not any talk that was public, of course. And so that's why, to your point, a lot of people were thrown completely off by this. However, when it comes to a business like, well, if you're not making money, you're going to have to shut it down, right? And that's exactly what happened here.
Yeah, it's definitely the thing that out of a lot of the like major regions, I guess not major regions, but out of all the regions, like OPL, they haven't had the best results internationally. They're not the most viewed. They do have like a lot smaller of a fan base in comparison to leagues like, the CB LOL, like the LJL, like the CIS. Like it's a much more small market kind of thing.
Yeah.
So financially, it definitely, makes sense in terms of shutting it down, but it makes it, a lot more difficult for players who live in Australia to, help build their own brand and, get involved professionally now.
Yeah, and I do think so. I did see some talk about Riot not investing enough resources into the OPL for it to be successful. I don't know if I really buy that. It's hard for us to know because we don't know exactly what they allocate as far as their resources are. But I do genuinely think that Riot did give it a good go in to try to make the OPL happen. I just think that it wasn't there. There wasn't enough fans or enough of an infrastructure to keep it going. However, it's not all doomed for the OPL. The word is that the OPL will sort of be absorbed by the LCS, and not exactly the league, but the players and coaches are able to go over to North America. More specifically, the players without actually taking up an import slot anymore, which may not be a big thing for NA on the world stage, but I actually think that this really changes the dynamic of how the LCS is going to work. Just basically having a lot more players to choose from. Maybe not any absolute superstars, but we have seen that the OPL can produce some good talent, like we've seen with FBI this year.
Yeah, they're definitely making the best out of a bad situation, I would say, with it, giving all
Yeah.
the OPL players a chance to potentially succeed in another region without having to make like these big impacts on these overall teams. Like from an NA perspective, it's a big deal to waste one of your import slots on an emerging regions type of player. And we've seen sort of this year with Closer and FBI, and even previously with Broken Blade, like there are players, there are hidden gems that you can find in these emerging regions that are worthy of an import slot and are top players in the league. And now that all OPL players are able to now come to NA with not having to take up an import slot, it makes it a lot easier for NA teams to want to pick them up, to, even look at them in the first place and give them a fair shot. Because
Hmm.
it's definitely, when you compare like a high level OPL player who takes up an import slot compared to maybe an average NA player, in the majority of cases, you're probably going to take the average NA player because he's a resident and doesn't take up that import slot.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. Now you got people that have been over here. Like FBI is more valuable now than he was a year ago. I don't believe his contract is up, But I wonder if he could actually renegotiate, seeing as he was such a good player. He's no longer taking up that import slot. Like there is no doubt that he is more valuable now than he was just a week ago, and so that's really interesting. But I also want to highlight there are some other players that are definitely noteworthy in that come from Australia that have been playing in North America and could realistically see some play at the pro level now. I'm going to throw out a few names, and I think some of them might actually catch a lot of people's interest. The first one, Fudge, the top laner for Cloud9, definitely showed some success in the academy. I'm not saying he would replace Licorice, but he could replace some of the top laners in the LCS. Triple was another player. He was the mid laner for FlyQuest. I don't see him taking up another slot in the LCS. However, it still does help him now that he no longer would take up a slot. We talked about FBI having more value now, but here's the one that's really interesting to me is Lost for TSM Academy. Now, we could start a little bit of a rumor if we wanted to and say that Doublelift now has to fight for his position at TSM. I just don't think that that's incredibly accurate. However, we did see Doublelift struggle this year, and wouldn't that be crazy if there was the Doublelift and Biofrost versus Lost and Treats? There was a lot of hype behind the duo that was playing in Academy this year about, and I think it was GBay99. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think GBay99 made a video about why we'll never see that duo play in the LCS, or something like the best duo that won't ever be able to play in the LCS, something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, of course. But this might change some things because Lost will no longer take up an import slot.
Yeah, I do think not. I mean, it definitely does help. The majority of OPL players, but I think in Lost's case, he's kind of already had some play in North America, and it's going to sort of take like another resurgence in Academy, I think, for him to actually garner a starting spot. I know that TSM extended Doublelift right when they signed him. His contract was supposed to be up at the end of this year, but TSM re-signed him for I think another year, I believe. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe Doublelift's contract goes until the end of 2021 or the
Mhm.
end of the 2021 competitive season, which is roughly in like mid-November. In Lost's case, I don't think it's going to be like a battle, but in a lot of other
No, me neither.
cases
But it's
where,
fun to
but
think it
yeah,
might be
in a
though.
lot of cases where we look at some of these OPL players who've already come over to North America, like Fudge, like King, who are on C9 Academy, because I think a lot of analysts and even teams in the LCS do consider Cloud9 Academy as like an LCS caliber team across the whole board. They have a very good
Hmm.
team. They've been dominating Academy, just Cloud9 Academy in general, for the better part of 3 years. So I definitely think that, Fudge and King will probably be on LCS rosters at the start of this season, if not by the summer season in 2021.
And my guess, if I'm being totally honest, I do actually think Lost will be able to see some play in the LCS. I just don't think it'll be with TSM, if
Yeah,
I'm being realistic.
I agree with
The
that as well.
the fun way of doing it is to see if Doublelift has to fight for his spot, right? That's the interesting way of doing it. However, I don't see TSM letting go of Doublelift again. They've made that mistake before. Even though I do think that Doublelift probably had his worst season ever, I don't think that it was that bad that he would lose an LCS spot. But it's definitely something that's interesting to talk about, and I am definitely interested to see where these players from OPL or from the Oceanic region rather where they do land as the season starts. And just my last point on this topic is I don't think that this is going to improve North America on the world stage, but I do think that this will make the bottom of the league better. I think that it's very clear that the LCS struggles to have like 10 competitive teams, and I think that's usually because you have two teams at the bottom that are really struggling to field a competitive roster. I think this might help your CLGs and your Immortals, where they'll have just a little bit more options that could help them in the long run. But I mean, that's to be determined, right?
Yeah, but I think to that point, improving the bottom will steadily improve the top as better competition is able to, flood into the league and the overall level of the teams gets better. Like that's what helps improve your league. When we
Yeah,
like
you have
LCS has
less
been,
useless scrims, right?
yeah, like LCS has been such a top heavy league for pretty much since its inception.
Hmm.
We've seen like spurts where we do have like maybe there's like five good teams or there's six good teams moving into playoffs, but in the majority of cases there's only four or less. And if we can steadily improve the worst teams, that will then help out the mid-level teams, and then if the mid-level teams start really challenging those top-level teams, it makes a region better.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that I wanted to say as well is even though this does there's going to be a lot of OPL players that are out of a job now. That's just the sad reality. I wouldn't even be surprised to see some of them move over to North America. Not like the solo queue is amazing, but I'm sure the solo queue in North America has to be better than it would be the oceanic region. And maybe they try to make their careers there just by moving to North America and trying to grind solo queue and then make it onto a team. Who knows? But what I actually do think is that for the top players that were in the OPL, now you have a way more realistic way of making it to the LCS or just a big region.
Hmm.
Because before, like, there may have been some players that LCS orgs wanted, but they didn't take them because they're import slots. Now that those players get a chance now, right? So there is some good that comes of this, even through all the bad of all these people losing their jobs and even the casters and stuff like that. It wouldn't surprise me to see Spawn come over to North America. I'm pretty sure North America is still looking for other casting talent, so maybe Spawn joins the LCS next year.
Just on
That's
Spawn, one
possible.
thing that I saw was somebody on Twitter, I think it was Atlas, was responding to a tweet because the LCK English broadcast is has an open position for casting
Okay.
talent. So Atlas was literally like tweeting at the LCK on Twitter, like hire Spawn.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, there you go. So it's not even just the LCS that could benefit from this; other
Yeah.
regions as well. Clearly, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, I think like Spawn. I don't think he's out of a job. I think that he's very good on the broadcast, and I don't think he'll have any issues there. Anything else before we hop into a little bit of a groups recap?
Nah.
Okay, let's get into that. I did say at the start of the show, we don't want to go too far into this because there wasn't anything crazy that happened from groups. Pretty much what we saw in week one kind of carried over to week two. We did see some NA teams turn it around, but obviously not enough to move on. So North America is officially out. But let's start with Group A. What caught your eye from week two in Group A?
Yeah, I mean, Team Liquid, they definitely stepped it up. You know, they had a pretty disappointing week one, only going 1-2, and you know, realistically, everyone thought they would be 1-2 in a much different fashion with them beating Machi and most likely losing to G2. But
Yeah,
their only win of the week one stage came from beating G2, and it was kind of like sad off the get-go when Team Liquid did lose that first match to G2, and they pretty much just got destroyed in that match. And I feel
yeah.
like in everyone's mind, like they figured that like okay, TL is just gonna go like 0-3 or 1-2 again, and that was gonna be it. But they kind of they ended up surprising a lot of people and making the group very competitive down to the wire.
Yeah, I said this. I think I tweeted out something like this, but I think NA fans should be proud of how TL played. I think that lots of teams could have just folded up after they take that loss to G2. You could easily just say, "Well, whatever, like we're done." But they didn't. They showed up and they actually played some really good games. I do think that their slow play style came to bite them in the ass, specifically in that G2 game. I think that we saw that coming a mile away, so that feels bad. But regardless, I do think that this team showed up, and I think that they went out in the most respectable way possible. To go 3-3 at Worlds, that is a good showing. Sure, you didn't move on, but I mean, you didn't. I mean, we can talk about TSM in a little bit, but at least you didn't do what TSM did and not show up almost the whole tournament. You know?
Jesus. Yeah, I
I know it's hard. I know we're already getting into the TSM stuff even a little early, but sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I just after TL lost that G2 game, basically there was only like one scenario where they potentially get out of the group, and that scenario almost happened. So if G2 had actually beaten Suning and TL forces a tiebreaker against Suning, who knows? Maybe they would have gotten out because they were looking really good in week two.
Yeah. When it came to Machi, I didn't really see too much. Nothing that we hadn't already seen. I think Gemini, in my opinion, was their best player, but you need more than just a jungler to be able to carry yourself through Worlds and through Worlds group stage. And I think that they didn't really get much else out of their other players. So, I mean, hats off to Gemini. I think he looked really good, especially his Volibear play was incredibly impactful. But that's all I really saw from them. When it comes to Suning and G2, though, I really enjoy. Man, their games are so fun to watch. Their
Hmm.
games are actually great. They're both two very volatile teams. You don't know what's going to happen. They're both very aggressive and they go for plays. And so I'm so glad that both of these two teams were able to move on. Even though I would, of course, prefer if TL moved on, being a North American fan. This is like two teams that you should be more than happy to see play more games. They're very very exciting to watch. However, I what happened for me is what I expected. I think Suning was the better team, not by a landslide by any means, but Suning did beat them in both of their games in their last game of week 2 and the tiebreaker that followed. Um, just really, really clutch plays. Specifically, the one that comes to mind is Bin on the GP. That to me is
Yeah,
the
that
best
barrel
play I've
was
seen in the tournament.
disgusting.
That was insane. Um, and let's not sugarcoat it because Suning could have thrown that game, right? Like they could have easily lost. They had a huge lead, and honestly, even though I'm getting giving credit to Bin, he was throwing a lot of their lead away. Like they're trying to siege with Baron, and he continuously got cut on the GP. Of course, he made up for it with that amazing play, the TP flank and the barrel. But not everything is smooth sailing for this team, and so they do have some question marks and some worries going into the quarterfinals.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I found really surprising about Suning was kind of like a bit of a a flip to their play style compared to the LPL and now Worlds is, you know, as you mentioned, G2 being a very volatile team, Suning wasn't really known as a super volatile team. That title went more to like your JDG and your top esports.
Yep.
But we saw last year at Worlds against another Chinese team in the World Finals against FPXs to beat G2, you have to go punch for punch against them. Because if you attempt to play slow against them, they're just going to make more plays than you. They're going to get lane pressure. They're going to move around the map. And they pretty much did similar things to what FPX was doing against G2. And it worked out really well. I really like the way that they were playing. I want to bring up Bin again. I think his group stage, he was really like he was just going all in on whatever champion he'd had. You give him some sort of 1v1 style champion, whether it be like Jax, Irelia, late game Gangplank, like he just wants to fight you over and over. And I really like that play style. It's kind of like the Shy esque.
Yeah, it's tons of fun to watch. My other worry in this group, I said that I'm a little bit worried about Suning being able to hold on to games, but I don't think that's any different for G2. One of the other things that really stood out for me from G2 was their only like absolutely clean game was the of week 2, that is, was the game against Team Liquid, and that was a very slow style game. That was like honestly, I thought G2 actually played completely flawless in that game against TL. It felt like TL didn't really make that many mistakes, but they were just falling further and further behind because G2 was being proactive and TL wasn't. And so it makes me wonder if if G2 is the one deciding the pace of the game and they're the ones being the proactive and making plays, I have full confidence in this team. However, when they're not the ones doing that, that's when they seem to blunder and seem to be a little bit shaky in their plays. And so that's where I'm a little bit worried going into the next round because I don't think Gen G will be slow on them. I think Gen G will be proactive and will want to make a lot of plays, especially with Clid. And so I think G2 is in tough in their next series. But we will get to the predictions a little bit later. I don't have anything else on this group. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we move on?
No, I think you're exactly right when you say like when G2 is able to set the tempo of the game, it seems that they're really difficult to stop. But if you're able to either play your game or sort of disrupt their tempo, it seems to really send them a miss.
Yeah, definitely. And one last little thing for Perks is I think he actually had a really good showing, specifically in the Suning game. I was heavily critical of Perks, and so I just wanted to give him a little bit of props for his performance in that game on Senna. I think that he was the reason that they were able to come back and actually have a chance in winning that tiebreaker game that unfortunately went the way of Suning. Next up, we got Group B. Group B was honestly, again, just as expected, nothing crazy. The only thing that went a little bit awry was that PSG finished ahead of Rogue, but I mean, let's be real, it doesn't matter. They're both out. We knew that it was going to be JDG and Damwon moving on, and that's pretty much what we saw.
Yeah, and JDG faltering a little bit, losing to PSG, and therefore not being able to force a tiebreaker against Damwon for first place.
Mm.
Because they beat Damwon in that final game, and if JDG takes down PSG, JDG is sitting at first in this group. But
So,
overall, like you mentioned, like the expected happened. Nothing
yeah.
unexpected. Like nobody really cared whether if it was going to be Rogue or PSG finishing third in this group. I think you could have gone either side and nobody would have really disagreed with you. The only thing that was in question was really 1-2, and with JDG faltering, Damwon just takes one.
Yeah, and so here's what I want to say about the JDG game beating Damwon. I don't want to say it's a throwout game because this could have been a legitimate comp that Damwon was actually trying, but I do feel like this was a little bit experimental. I did go back and look at how many games Showmaker has played on Galio all summer and so far at Worlds. he played one other game on Galio. And this was a game that didn't really matter. It was already decided. Damwon knew that they were going to take the number one seed. And so my thoughts are, do you really want to show another one of your comps before going into quarterfinals? Probably not. And again, maybe this was a legitimate comp and this was exactly what they want to play even in a best of 5 series. I don't know, but to me this didn't feel like yeah, it didn't feel like they were giving it their all as far as their draft is concerned.
Yeah,
So I don't want to completely dismiss because JDG did win, but again, if this game matters more, I don't think we see Showmaker on the Galio.
yeah, and for me, this is what
Predator Galio,
always,
by the way.
yeah, Predator Galio is terrible. I don't know. I don't know why that's just become the norm on
Dude, we're
Galio.
seeing it a lot, by the
It
way, a
doesn't make any
lot.
sense. Like I really don't understand like what's wrong with just like Nimbus Cloak Spellbook. I feel like you're getting like I don't know, like 30 less % movement speed, but you're like getting Spellbook swaps. Like you're not, I don't know, like what?
I don't know what to say about it anymore because we've harped on this for a couple of weeks now, and the more we talk about how we dislike it, the more we're seeing it played. And I
Yeah,
still don't see the Predator having any impact. Like I am looking at these games and I'm like, okay, when is Predator going to matter? And it almost never does, man. It almost never does.
yeah.
So I'm gonna try to stop harping on this myself because yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. We say it's bad, they play it more, it doesn't really seem to do anything, and then we see it more again. I don't know. I'm lost for words.
Yeah. Just back to our earlier point, I guess. For me, it always makes it a little more difficult to judge like week two performances and, trying to like measure the level of all the teams is because when you're playing in games that don't mean anything or you've actually like been statistically eliminated from contention, like you're gonna like they teams play a lot differently. When you're playing with nothing to lose, it always just seems like the matches will be different. Like when you take a look at Team Liquid, like
Hmm.
statistically, they were such a long shot after they won that first G2 game. They kind of completely switched up their style. They were playing much more loose, playing much more aggressive, and obviously the results showed. And then going back to this group, we saw with PSG, they were 0-3 in week one, pretty much statistically out, and only like a small percentage of scenarios did they actually make it out. Same sort of thing. They're coming out, they're playing much more aggressive. Their level of play seemed to improve. And just as this Damwon JDG game we're talking about is how do we really take that game into consideration from both sides? Like, do we look at that game and say, oh, wow, okay, so JDG just beat Damwon. That's really good for JDG. Or you take a look at it from the side of, okay, yeah, Damwon's trying out experimental stuff. They're not going 100%. They don't want to reveal anything. This is just a throwaway game. And it makes it really difficult to kind of judge the level of these teams and, kind of giving like your end thoughts going into the group stage. Obviously, Damwon's ending out on a pretty sour note, losing that final game. But in their eyes, they might have just been throwing away that game, and it's really hard to tell.
Yeah, to me, it's like it's not a huge risk of trying a different comp. It's like if they win with it, hey, that's another threat that people have to ban out and pick ban. If they lose with it, it's whatever. It doesn't really matter all that much, anyways. We're still taking first seed, so that's easily what it could have been. But I do want to give some praise to Zoom because I think that was one of his best performances. He really hard carried that game on the Camille. I think he was like 3-1 by 4 minutes, and he was just absolutely rolling the rest of the game. I don't even remember how many kills he ended with. He could have ended the game with like 10 kills or something. So he had an absolute pop off performance. Where I do think JDG needs to worry a little bit is actually in the jungle. And I can't believe I'm saying this. Kanavi came in with so much hype around him. Um, and maybe it's because he's playing a lot of Lilia, which, by the way, Lilia is a fine pick. I don't have any problems with the pick, but it's not the champion that Kanavi's really going to style on, and that's what Kanavi is known for, is making absolutely huge style plays on the Lee Sin. But the Lee Sin hasn't really had any priority, or let's say minimal. It's had minimal priority so far at Worlds, and I think that could be something that's actually hurting Kanavi at Worlds so far.
Yeah, he's playing. It's kind of weird. He's really been heavy on the AP junglers. He's played 3 Lilia games and 2 Sylas games. Sylas, it's kind of like a stomper pick, Sylas jungle. Like I feel like against good teams, like you're never really going to want to whip out Sylas jungle because the good junglers will heavily punish you. Like I really just could not see them whipping out Sylas jungle against a top esports who have Karsa, like an actual in a game against Damwon with Canyon. Like I don't remember who he played it exactly against, but I think he played the Sylas against one rogue game and one PSG game. So his jungle champ pool just seems to be a little all over the place. He hasn't looked the best on Lilia, and like you said, he does look a lot better on these high impact, high tempo champions like Lee Sin.
Sorry, I just am getting a message from someone.
Oh, I'm handing it back to you, I guess.
I apologize. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, no, the other, I completely agree that like that's where I think that he's going to be most impactful is on that Lee Sin pick. I do also want to talk about Barrow a little bit. Even in that game against JDG, I thought his Alistair was great, and I think that he was the only reason they had a chance to win that game. But regardless of that, I still actually thought that both teams looked a little bit sloppy, and that's not what you want to see in your last game. That's not what you want to see going into quarterfinals is a sloppy game. But it is nevertheless what we saw. I do also want to give some credit to some of the 80 carries. I thought that Loken's Jin looked really good. Mind you, it was against Rogue, who did look weak in the group stage, but I thought that he looked really good. And same thing with Ghost. I thought his Jin was great as well. Also against PSG, so a weaker team as well. But these guys are looking really, really good in the bot lane, and I think that you're going to need an absolutely solid AD carry if you're going to be successful at Worlds. Even though a lot of the play has been focused towards top, I don't think people can forget just how impactful these AD carries can be. And I think Loken and Ghost both showed that. So I'm really excited to see what they have to offer in quarterfinals.
Yeah, I thought JDG's bot lane looked really, really good. I'm really liking Jin as a pick. Actually, it seems like a lot of people that have been picking the Jin have had really good results on it. I think the champion is super, super strong, provides a lot of long range utility, has somewhat aggressive laning, and I'm overall really liking the pick. I think it's sort of fitting well into the 80 carry champion meta right now with Ashe, Senna, and now Jin. All three champions sort of offer a bit longer range and just are able to, I guess, stay more back against sort of like the heavy diving champions that we're seeing. If it could be a Lee Sin, you're so much further back from champions like Lilia, very hard to get slept in team fights, and really liking the pick. I want to see more Jin at Worlds for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to see it as well. I think it's been really fun to watch. Anything else before we move on to Group C? We did say that we'd try to go through these a little bit quicker. Are you good to move on, or any last
Yep,
points?
I'm good.
Okay, let's move on to Group C. Where do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I don't know. It
Do we
group.
want to pull off the band-aid and start with
I
TSM?
mean, I don't know. I was gonna
Uh,
save some TSM stuff for a bit later, just because I.
okay.
But yeah, I guess we'll just preface it a little bit. TSM went 0-6. They made history as the first ever Pool 1 team to ever go 0-6 in a group stage. Really disappointing performances out of all of TSM. It really seemed like they were kind of reverting back to their more passive play style. It's kind of like this version of TSM that we just saw at Worlds was kind of the version that we saw for the majority of Summer Split. you know, Towards the end of the season, they really were turning it on in terms of, upping the aggression. And then we saw them revert back to that same style in their 0-3 loss to Golden Guardians. And then when they made their run through the losers bracket, they kind of went back to that more up tempo play style. And it's pretty night and day, the two different TSMs.
Yeah, honestly, this was just another case once again of what we were worried about came to life, and this was for me. It was the Bjergsen Zillion was just not really impactful like we saw it in North America. It got stomped in week one. I think it was against the set. It got stomped. Well, maybe not stomped, but it didn't really have much of an impact in week two. I don't remember what that matchup was. I
He
just
was
remember it
playing
wasn't
against
all that
It
great.
was GA's Oriana.
Okay, yes. Anyways, he had some nice ulties, but nothing really impactful to completely turn a team fight, which is usually what you were seeing out of Bjergsen Zillion back in North America. He did have a really good performance on the Lucian. I remember against Gen G. Gen G, okay, they should have won that game also. TSM, like,
Yikes.
I do say that TSM didn't show up at Worlds, but it's not like they didn't show up. Honestly, I don't think that's actually fair for me to say because they did have some winnable games. I think their first game against Fnatic in week one, they could have won. I think this game against Gen G, they could have won. They just somehow managed to fall apart in these games. And Bjergsen was 6-0 on the Lucian in that game. Like, that is the perfect time to be able to take over a game. And then there was the play where Spica stayed on Baron, nobody else did. And Spica had to early smite so he didn't die. And then I think it was who was it? It was Ruler that just walked in and just autoed it on Senna. I think it was just autoed the
Yeah.
Baron, took the Baron, and you just knew at this point. Okay, if TSM was still in contention at Worlds, that would have made me so sad. However, they weren't, and I just had to laugh. Like sometimes it gets so bad that you're just like, oh my god, I can't do anything but laugh at this because that play summed up what TSM was at Worlds this year, and it just felt so bad to watch. Um, but I mean, hey, hats off to Gen G for finding a way to take the win. They didn't look the cleanest throughout the group stage, but I still think they were the best team in groups. I'll say that.
Groups being just Group C, you mean?
Group C, yes. Sorry,
Yeah.
yes.
I don't know. It TSM just seemed to be really struggling just with their communication overall, both in that Baron play. Like, did they know that Spica smited early? Like, did he communicate that, but the rest of the team's not picking up on that? Or is he smiting early and not saying anything? Like, it just seems so weird for them to just all move out of the pit and just like
Yeah.
I have to assume that either Spica didn't communicate that he didn't have smite, or that the team is just making some split call. Like half the people are saying to book it. Spica is trying to say, "Yo, we need to stick this." Like just seemed like their communication was all off the board. I didn't like their draft, the way that they drafted in comparison to their play, and then like therefore their aggression in these games were really really terrible. Their first game against Fnatic, sorry, not their first game. The first game of week two against Fnatic, which was the first game of the day. They picked like a super heavy dive comp with Camille, Galio, and I don't remember who the support was. The support was maybe Leona,
Yeah, it was.
and
Yeah, they were all dive. They were
yeah,
perfect dive comp, and they didn't dive anything.
they didn't make any proactive plays for the first 15 minutes,
Yeah.
15, 20 minutes of the game and just let Fnatic run around. And
I,
it just seemed like their game plan, like we mentioned before, the strength of TSM in their playoff run in North America was their drafting and their preparation. And it seemed like that was non-existent here at Worlds.
I do want to give some credit over to Fnatic in that game though. Um, even though you should be able to make some plays happen. Honestly, with Camille, Galio, Leona, that is already enough to be able to make plays. You should be able to make plays bot or top, and you should be able to roam as Galio at some point or another. And where I want to give credit is if Fnatic has enough pressure in certain lanes or they have their waves managed properly, you can avoid giving TSM those options to make those plays. However, you should be able to make a play by 15 minutes or by 20 minutes or whatever it was. It took so long for TSM to do anything to the point where they pretty much did nothing. And so it's some credit to Fnatic, some flame towards TSM. Regardless, Fnatic looked good, and I think that they deserve some credit, especially in the level ones. I think you and I have talked about this already, but I think the level one meta is really favoring Fnatic. They seem to be a team that is very aggressive in level ones, and they're ready to fight all the time. That's something that I've really noticed specifically with their bot lane. I think Fnatic's bot lane has been so good. I came into this tournament thinking Selfmade was going to have to hard carry this team, and while I do think he has been doing that, I think that the bot lane as well has participated in that. I think that Hillisang also, someone I've been very critical of in the past, has been very, very good so far at Worlds. And so a lot of credit to him and Reckless.
Yeah, I was watching the Fanatics YouTube series. Trying to remember what it's called. I think it's called Legends in Action, but it's sort of
Okay.
similar to like the TSM Legends style of video. But they primarily do it always around playoffs and international competition. So one thing they were talking about in that in their video series was how Hillisang is apparently like he does the majority of like the level one coordination. So I think he's been doing a great job. We kind of labeled him as a bit coin flippy in his sort of
I mean, he
gameplay.
was.
I
He
mean, yeah,
was.
but he's
Yep.
definitely he's not looking coin flip at all. He seems to be really on point. Him and Reckless, knowing their spikes and troughs in the laning phase, have done a really good job. Knowing when to just force fight level ones. We saw it in, I believe it was the LGD game where they were playing Ash Leona solo
Yes.
killing Senna plus somebody else and blowing all four summoner spells. We saw it in that first game against Genji where Life was running the flashless spellbook for Khan. They've been doing a really great job. Like you mentioned, I think we were expecting that Selfmade was going to have to go in and carry this team, and we were kind of mentioning how Bwipo and Nemesis really weren't looking their best. But it just seems that Selfmade has continued his high level of play while every other player has managed to step it up, and they're looking really, really good. I don't think you can sleep on this team, even though they are in a very difficult side of the bracket against all the LPL teams. And I think Fnatic's actually looking really, really good.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely totally fair assessment of Fnatic. I think that the whole team has really stepped up. and have had a better showing than what was expected of them. So really good for them. I want to talk about LGD a little bit. This was a team that like no one knew exactly what to expect coming into groups. It was like sometimes they would run it down and sometimes they would hard carry. So it does seem fitting that they end with a 3-3 record. The one player that I really wanted to highlight was Lang Xing, though. I thought that he actually had a pretty good tournament overall, not even just in play-ins, but in groups as well. Some mistakes here and there, but the amount of pressure that he's able to put out on a Renekton, he's a guy that I have no issue giving the Renekton pick. We've talked before, you and I, about how there's some top laners that just don't deserve the blind Renekton. I think that he's one of them that I would actually feel comfortable giving the blind Renekton to. I think that he had a really good tournament,
Yeah,
and I'm a little disappointed to not be able to see more of his play throughout the rest of the tournament.
yeah, I think it's just because he's such a good laner. Like that's the main thing that I've really have been impressed by Longjing with is his laning. Even with LGD, stumbling in the play-in and the group stage of the play-in tournament, he continuously won his lane almost every single time. He was one of the primary reasons that they managed to stay in a lot of those pretty like unwinnable sort of games where like they would be giving Ocean Soul to the enemy team. Even in the best of fives, he was doing a really good job. And at group stage, he was going even at the minimum in almost all of his lanes, and he was looking really really good. I guess the person on LGD I was most disappointed by was GA. I thought he would be a lot. I don't think his play. I thought he would just be like much better. And that's not to say that he's
Reliable,
bad.
maybe that's
It
what I was thinking. I thought
maybe
he'd be more
reliable,
reliable,
but
honestly.
I just thought like his level of play was going to be so much higher than it actually was. Like I don't think he played terrible by any means. Like but he just seemed like he was one grade below where I thought he was coming into the tournament.
Yeah, coming in from play-ins, he was someone that had such good performances, but then would have one or two throws every now and then.
Yeah.
I thought that he would be able to fix that coming into the group stage, so I also had high expectations, and I thought he would be more reliable as well. But yeah, again, we didn't really see it. When it comes to Gen G, though, where I was really surprised was they. Okay, I think there was games where they did play around bot, and I think that Ruler was obviously able to have an impact. But I thought that they played around top lane way more than I was expecting. Just because you have Ruler in the bot lane, this guy who's known as the best AD carry in the tournament, says a lot of people. Let's say arguably. And they did play to top to Rascal a fair bit, and not that I think Rascal's bad. I actually thought Rascal had a pretty good group stage, but just a little surprising to me to see where they're putting their resources.
Yeah, I thought Rascal was all right. Yeah, he had some pretty good performances on the Volibear. I think Volibear has kind of been like a really surprising pick that's sort of come out of the meta that, when the champion first got reworked, everyone was really liking the Volibear jungle, and now it's kind of completely flip-flopped to it going to top lane. Part of the reason is I think that early laning phase and getting an aggressive lane pick that is able to dominate your opponent is super, super important. So while Volibear is somewhat similar to the Renekton in the fact that it's a very early game focused champion who kind of falls off pretty hard late game, it's a super aggressive pick. I think it has a little bit longer of an expiration date than the Renekton because the ult is so useful for, you know, doing dives in the early game and in the late game. Being able to dive onto the carries in team fights if you know that they're flashless, and we're seeing a lot of immobile AD carries with Jhin, Ashe, and Senna. So Volibear is, it's not, it's much easier for a Volibear to like try to lock down an AD carry than it being like an AD carry Lucian, an AD carry Kai'Sa, an AD carry Xayah. All three can either just dash or, you know, immune themselves to get away. So that's another pick that I'm actually really liking at Worlds, despite people sort of flaming it or thinking that it's not that good. I just think that laning phase is so important to, the
Mm.
dynamic of the game, and it's just super important to secure an early power pick laner who's able to dominate in the 1v1 and can help out other areas of the map.
Yeah, I think the priority on the Volibear just comes from it being able to not get stomped. We've seen so many games swing hard in one way or another through the top lane, and I think that it's a pick that doesn't have a huge amount of priority on it and doesn't get absolutely stomped like you were saying, and has a good laning phase. So I think that's why we're going to continue to see it. If teams want to play through other lanes like Gen G should want to do, you can have more priority on bot lane and mid lane picks or even jungle picks, and then you could just throw the Volibear top and it'll be kind of safe, kind of like the 2020 version of GP where it's like it just kind of nullifies the lane. But nevertheless, anything else before we move on to Group D?
No, I think that's good.
All right, let's hop into the last group. Group D saw a little bit of a resurgence out of FlyQuest. Not a lot of people were expecting that. Um, they managed to beat top esports. And yeah, they had like a little cheesy level one, but I mean that's meta now. If you're not ready for that, I don't know what you've been doing all tournament if you're not ready for level ones. But not only that, FlyQuest somehow managed to win every lane in that game. Don't ask me what the hell's going on, but Solo's Gnar was up 76 CS to like 50 something at one point against the Urgot. And it made me wonder, it started making me wonder like if because okay, so let me just explain what I'm talking about here. I had a lot of worry, and not just me. A lot of people had a lot of worry about Solo coming into this tournament about whether he'd be able to hold his own in the top lane. And the first couple of games in this in group stage, we saw no, he was getting absolutely smashed. And
Oh,
I
he was
think it's
wreathing it.
actually because yeah, he was running it down. But as the tournament went on, I started to maybe to realize that maybe it's because he actually isn't that great of a weak side top laner. He's been put on the weak side all the time, but when he gets that counter pick, he's actually able to hold his own and clearly even win lane against some of the greatest top laners in the world, apparently. And yes, this is one game. I realize that. But regardless, he clearly showed, and it wasn't just that one game that he was able to do it. I think he did against UOL. Also, yeah, sure, boss, maybe not the best top laner, but we really did see Solo turn around his tournament and actually have some good performances. And so it made me wonder if FlyQuest had kind of been misprioritizing their top lane picks through the whole tournament by just blind picking top lanes and just letting them get clapped up there. But anyways, I mean, it's too late to find out now how good he could have done if he had continued to get those counter picks in the top lane. But I was really critical of him last week, and I thought he had a pretty good week too. So I just wanted to give him some props there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Solo stepped up a lot more in week two because he definitely looked like one of the worst players at the tournament in week one, and just in
Yeah,
terms
I think
of
he was the worst. I think that's
yeah,
fair to say.
he was up there for sure. But
Yep.
the main people that I was really impressed by on FlyQuest were actually PoE, Wild Turtle, and Ignar. I thought, I guess mainly for me was actually Wild Turtle. I thought Wild Turtle would be Solo-like in terms that he's going to be a liability. He's not going to be up to par with the rest of the players in his group because obviously he has great players he's going against in Def, Jackie Love, and uh, in combination with Ignar, you're going up against supports like Uyanja and Keria who have really just been insane for at least in the summer season and from week one at Worlds. So I was really expecting their bot lanes to struggle, FlyQuest bot lane to struggle against top esports and DRX, and for even that fact, like maybe potentially have a like they would go even against like the OL bot lane because I think Gadget and Santaz were actually looking pretty good in the playing stage. But Turtle and Ignar, I think, were playing really, really well. Ignar looked really good for the majority of his games. I thought his Blitzcrank, he whipped it out again. His Blitzcrank was looking really good. Wild Turtle was playing the Misfortune. He was playing the Jin. I think there was only one other Misfortune pick in the entirety of the group stage. Don't remember who it was, but he likes that pick. He was playing a lot of the Jin. He
Is it
wasn't.
Kramer?
Maybe that sounds right. I think. But
I don't
he
remember for sure. Honestly,
but
I
he
might
he
just be
just
guessing.
he just wasn't a liability at all, and he wasn't dying very much. He's still flashing forward, but he's flashing forward a little bit more intelligently instead of just like flashing into the whole enemy team. But I thought his play was really really good, and PoE was doing PoE things. He was managing to hold his own against Chovy and Knight while absolutely dumpstering no man's like holy moly.
Oh my
Don't
god,
ever
man!
blind pick
Holy.
Cassidy in professional play. They're gonna pick something like a Vayne or some sort of aggressive pick, and you're gonna go oh and whatever he went.
Well, we saw it in Group A as well. Jensen absolutely smashed the blind Kassadin pick. Jensen played the Syndra into what's Machi's mid lane mission?
Yes,
Yeah, he decided to blind pick the Kassadin also and got absolutely destroyed.
please don't
So
do that.
if there's one thing we can expect out of North American mid laners, it's to destroy a blind pick Kassadin. So that's something we could do. But no, you're absolutely right. PoE looked really good. He definitely looked like he belonged at Worlds, and I actually kind of felt bad for him because from his performance alone, I thought he deserved to move on. Maybe not the team, but I thought that he looked really, really good, and I hope that he gets a little bit more credit uh, after his Worlds performance because I think this is a guy that's been heavily underrated ever since he's joined NA. I think he's been a really good top laner, so really good for him. Um, yeah, I guess since we talked about No Man's a little bit, we'll get into it. I think he was the worst player at Worlds in the second week.
Yeah,
Holy shit, this guy was running it down. He was playing Lucian. I think think he played two Lucian games. Was it? Anyways, he didn't win either of those games. I'm fairly certain. Someone can fact check me on that, but I think he played two Lucian games. I think he lost lane in both of them. And yeah, big yikes for him. And then we saw what PoE did to him on the blind Cassidon, where he was just dying on repeat. Yeah, not a good second week for No Man's. Yikes.
Yeah, UOL, they were, I guess, a little bit disappointing. I thought it was going to be somewhat competitive between them and FlyQuest, and the first game that they played kind of was. It was really just a PoE show, absolutely dumpstering No Man's in mid lane,
Mm-hmm.
Syndra against Orianna.
Yep.
But in the grand scheme of things, like they just were not up to par with the level of Worlds teams. I think in any other group, the team goes 0-6 again.
Yeah, I think that's true. But let's talk about the good teams a little bit because these
Yeah,
are the teams that we should talk a little bit more about as they are the teams that moved on. So DRX took the two spot, and then Top Esports took the one spot. Yeah, these teams are looking good. I will say that I think DRX is looking better than people expected. Even though they lost two of their games, I thought that they looked pretty good throughout their week two, especially Piosik. I think that guy's been absolutely insane. I've been really
yeah, he's
impressed with him.
bonkers.
Yeah, he's a guy that like there wasn't a lot of hype coming in around him, but I think that he's been maybe the best player. I don't know.
Definitely their
Doran
best
looked
player.
really good on the Jace, man. Oh, also I want to talk. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
I forgot to bring this up against the FlyQuest game. I was looking at they brought up the gold graph in the middle of the game. Doran was at 15,000 gold to Solo's 9K. 15K to 9K. He was up 6K gold at 28 minutes into the game. That's one of the biggest gold differentials I've ever seen. 6,000 gold just in one lane alone. That is two full items. Yeah, that was just an absolute stomp for him. So I really wanted to give a lot of credit to Doran for that because there wasn't so much talk about him being able to hard carry games, but he definitely did in that one. And I'm not even a huge fan of the Jace pick, but he made it look really, really good. Yeah, Solo hasn't been the greatest when he gets counterpicked, but regardless, he absolutely styled on it and hard carried that game. So props to him for that.
yeah. You said it like DRX lost two games in group stage, but I don't think anyone's gonna like. You can cut them a break a little bit because they did have, I think, the pre-tournament favorites and top esports in their group. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think the second rematch between Top and DRX definitely wasn't as competitive as the first one in my eyes. Was still,
That was the first blood, right? That happened at like 24
yeah,
minutes. That was that one.
hmm
Yeah, that was a new world's record, by the way.
yeah.
For
That was
worlds,
just
that
a
was the new
weird
record.
game. That was just a weird
Yeah.
game overall. Both teams were they were kind of running scaling comps, but I mean, both teams were just like handshaking objectives, handshaking dragons. It was just weird. I don't know. It didn't seem like the kind of game that I thought it was going to be based on the first game with DRX drafting like a pretty early game comp and really taking it to top esports. Eventually, top kind of being able to slow it down and scale it out. But like you said, I think DRX is looking really, really good in comparison to what they were coming in. I think people thought that this team maybe wasn't as strong as Gen G, who were the third seed. But to me, I think DRX looked really good, and sure, Gen G had a better record going 5-1, but I think I value DRX's 4-2 more than Gen G's 5-1.
You mean top esports, not Gen G, right? We're talking top here.
No, I'm just comparing them to Gen G, and like
Oh, okay, gotcha.
people might say that yeah, Gen G's looking better because they went 5-1 in their group, and DRX only went 4-2. But to me, I value DRX's 4-2 much more than Gen G's 5-1.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think DRX did look better in the group stage. I think that's definitely true. Um, a guy that I'm still waiting to see more out of is Knight, though. Not that he was bad, like he was fine, but this was the most hyped player coming into Worlds. He was ranked number one, I'm pretty sure, on a lot of people's top 20 lists. And I thought he had a good group stage, but I'm really excited to see what he has to show in quarters because I think that this is a guy that we still haven't seen his full potential yet. And I think that we're going to see it really, really soon, especially going up against Nemesis in the next series. But we'll to that a little bit later. Anybody else that you want to highlight in this group before we move on?
No, I think a lot of the team, or sorry, just both teams in DRX and Top Esports are looking really good coming out of this group. Yes, they had that. I don't really know what to call it, but they had that loss against FlyQuest where FlyQuest like kind of just outplayed them. It kind of it's hard to really like pinpoint exactly like what went wrong for Top Esports in that game. I think it was just FlyQuest playing really, really well and Ignar popping off on the Blitzcrank. But I don't know. I think both these teams are looking good going into quarterfinals.
Yeah, there's a question in the live chat. So for those that aren't in the live chat, I'll just read it out. It says, "Do you think the last game between DRX and Top was Top testing a more reserved style of gameplay for bracket stage since they were already locked into the bracket?" That's a really good question. So I do want to highlight it. I actually don't really have an answer to that. I do think that it's very possible. It was such a weird game how slow it was. It felt like nothing was happening, and then all of a sudden there was first blood, and there was two more kills after that, and Baron happened, and then the game just snowballed. It felt so long for that game to get going, and once it got going, it was just over. But I do think that it's an interesting point to bring up. Maybe they didn't want to show anything, or maybe they just wanted to try out something different. It's very possible, and even though I don't have the answer, I think it's a very good question to ask.
I don't know. I think it's just more like I kind of mentioned before. Like both of these teams were playing like somewhat scaling comps, and when you have two scaling comps against each other, it's more just about like which team wants to force the aggression, and subsequently like how you actually attack that. Because if like I just looked up the champions that teams are playing against. Top Esports is playing Vlad top lane, Graves jungle, Ori mid, Ash bottom paired with Lulu. And you look at champions like Ash Lulu, like those are two really hard champions to just like go in on in a team fight. Ash is going to be constantly throwing out W's and slowing you. Like Lulu has a super OP peel champion. Then you look at the flip side with Graves and Vladimir, two champions that like to get in like melee range, potentially like with Vladimir wanting to dive backline and entering that fight against champions like Ornn and Kindred just seemed really, really difficult. You also have like DRX can use Galio ult as peel. It just seemed like the way that the two comps were interacting, it just seemed like I remember LS was saying this, just how like inaction is action. So when you have two teams that want to scale and are fine handshaking objectives and are looking for just that perfect fight, you can play out a game like that. We saw like when Top Esports got their fight, it was the first blood where they got a 3-0 sweep. When DRX found their fight after that, it was like a 3-1
Hmm.
team fight win for them. That team fight was really insane, by the way. Holy moly! Like that team fight was on like a knife's edge from being completely over for DRX when they like some I don't I was watching the replay of that game and like Ash got straight up one shot. I don't know by what. I think it was like the Kindred E, but like he just popped from 700 HP and I was like, what the fuck? But I don't know. I just think the way that the
I
two
actually don't
comps,
even remember it, honestly.
it's just because I was watching it like earlier today, but I just think it was the way the two comps interacted is they didn't need to fight, and both teams were kind of just waiting for the opportune moment. And we saw like when whichever team fight was making was turning up the aggression and was forcing the play, like it usually ended up working out for them.
Yeah, I think you said it right. Both these teams had reasons to just wait and scale, and I think that's just the reason why that game went that way. But anyways, thank you for the question, live chat.
Thanks,
Still
Keldrick.
definitely a good point. Let's move on to our awards for the week. We got Pop Off and Bean Soup back again. I'll let you start us off. Who you got popping off in this past week?
Were we doing five players, like one from each role, or just one player?
Let's just do the one for time's sake.
Okay. For pop off, I wasn't exactly sure who to go with. I kind of was like flip flopping between a couple, but I actually went with Ignar from FlyQuest. I thought he was playing really, really well. He whipped out the Blitzcrank again. I know it's not from a team that was like, that got out of groups or played like super, super well in the entirety of it, but I think Ignar played really well in week two, and I wanted to give him my pop off.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are going to look back at his Pantheon play in week one and say, like, he was just going in and not really on the same page as the rest of the team. But to me, that mistake was much more of a team communication thing. And then in week two, like you mentioned before, his Blitzcrank was freaking awesome. And I wish we would have seen more of it earlier. That felt like a pick to me that they probably played the Blitzcrank. And at the end of group stage, they probably went, shit, we probably should have played more Blitzcrank in the rest of the tournament. It felt like that aha moment was just a little bit too late for them. But yeah, you're right. I think that he was one of the main reasons that they were able to win those games with the Blitzcrank. I think he was absolutely great. For me, my pop off had to go to Bin. Even though I mentioned this earlier, how he kind of was the reason they threw their game a little bit against G2. He absolutely stepped up on that GPTP play. GPTP, I should say that. But anyways, the teleport play bot was the best play that we've seen at Worlds, or at least I think. Anyways, Senna and the Syndra were just popped. He blew up caps and perks all in one, and that to me was the only way they were winning that game. because Senna had so many stacks. She had like 140 stacks or something like that. It was so impossible to get to the Senna and kill her. She was dishing out so much damage. You needed a huge play like that to win that game, and sure enough, he did it. It was such a nice play. If people haven't seen the play, go watch the tiebreaker game of Suning and G2. It's the very last team fight. It's probably around like 35 minutes into the game
I
or
think it was
something
like
like that.
39 minutes.
Yeah, it's the very last fight right at the end of the game. It's worth watching. Such a clean play, and so absolutely popping off. And I had to give the award to him for that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That barrel chain was pretty disgusting. I didn't
Oh my
know.
god.
Yeah, he like throws ulti down on them, gets the slow off, then hits him with a gangplank barrel, autos the Senna, and then Q crits the Syndra and just one shots the both of them. I don't know if it might have even he might have
Oh god.
queued the
Yeah.
opposite person and autoed the other one, but I'm not sure. It was just disgusting. I don't know what to tell you.
He flashed back in to hit the barrel. I think he got two barrels off in that
Yeah,
play.
yeah.
Anyways,
So,
yeah, it was a really nice freaking play, and it won them the game. That at that point, I think they should have definitely lost the game as it got that late. But anyways, let's move on. Who you got, Bean Soup?
uh, I had to just give it to TSM. Just
Oof.
the like, man, they looked really bad. I like I gotta reiterate it. They looked so bad. I don't think the like there wasn't the only shining moment for them was I think just Spica playing well in the tournament. Despite going 0-6, I think Spica played decent, and that is the only thing that TSM should be uh hopeful about. I don't think they
So
need to take a hard look at like their way that they coach this team, the way that they play the game, the way that they play in tandem with their drafts. It might work in North America, and yes, we can talk about like if TSM needs to focus more on like domestic success and potentially following it up with like winning spring or winning summer. But at the same time, like you just can't come into the world championship and play like that and expect to win games.
yeah. So if you saw me laughing, you'll soon see why. Because my Bean Soup award was actually the TSM haters, and not for what you just said, because I think that's totally valid. When I'm talking TSM haters, I'm talking. I saw some people saying that TSM embarrassed them. These are fans we're talking about here, by the way. Fans said TSM really embarrassed me as an NA fan, and blah 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 blah. And when I saw that, that just tilted the fuck out of me. Because look, if you think you as a fan are embarrassed, you have no fucking idea how embarrassed the players are.
Yeah.
So I think that the actual criticism towards TSM is completely fair. I on this show already today have said they looked awful, and I think that they were really disappointing to watch. And so I think that your Bean Soup award is totally valid. Where I think it's not cool is where the fans are just totally out of touch with reality and thinking that TSM embarrassed them. Like, you are fucking lost, man. If you think that it's so bad for you, because I promise you the hate that these players are getting right now is just not totally fair. I think that the criticism is fair for their gameplay, but you have to remember these are guys that dedicate their freaking life to the game. And they know full well that if things don't end well, they're going to get all this criticism, but they do it anyways. And so I think some of the hate has just not been fair. There was a TSM disappreciation thread on Reddit. What is that?
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah.
So yeah, criticism is one thing, hate is another, and so definitely I'm giving the Bean Soup award to fans, TSM haters. I don't think that that was totally fair. Some of the hate that they got, and I think that yeah, I don't know. That's
Did
just
you see I think it was right after TSM had just lost to Gen G. There was like a tweet from Otawamne, the Shaka top laner, where he
yes,
was like flaming
yes, I did see that.
TSM because they were like smiling and laughing after losing, and then he was kind of like beefing with like some of the NA casters. I know Azale jumped in pretty quickly, and Captain Flowers. We're talking about how like yeah, people
I
have
saw
different.
Dash's comment.
Yeah, I don't. Maybe he was one of them that I saw as well, but I don't know. What were your thoughts on that? For me personally, like yes, it's definitely true that people might have different coping mechanisms after they lose a game, but the optics of it aren't very good when you're in that kind of a situation and you're smiling and laughing about it. Yes, it's like they can claim that it's their own coping mechanism, but it's not the best optics for the fans.
So here's my thing. Do I want to see if I'm a dedicated fan, if let's say I'm a hardcore TSM fan and I just watched my
Yikes.
team go 0-6, I am not happy to see smiling faces. But never and never ever would I ever consider saying that they don't care because they're smiling or blah blah blah. Like, no one knows what it's like to be in their shoes unless you are actually on that team. So for me, just because you see them smiling at the end, I said earlier, as I'm an NA fan. As I said earlier, when I saw the Barons deal, all I did was laugh because there's nothing else to do. They were already out of the tournament anyways. To me, sometimes there's nothing left to do but laugh, and maybe that's a me thing. I don't know, but I don't think it bothers me that much. Honestly, I think that it's pretty unfortunate to see people kind of flame them for that. I understand not wanting to see them smile or laugh or whatever it is, but I mean, I don't think that you're in any position to be the one judging unless you are in that position. And so I'm glad that we saw some of the NA casters kind of stand up for the players. No, most notably, the one that I saw was Dash saying, like, look, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said, like, that's just not fair to criticize them that way. And so I was happy to see that. I don't think that there was like a huge back and forth. I do think there was a tweet later on where Otawamne said something along the lines of, like, I misjudged or something, blah, 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 blah. I don't fucking know. But yeah, I don't think it was totally fair. So I'm glad that some of the casters stood up for the players because you just know that they were going to get plenty of flack already for that.
NA caster simping for TSM.
I mean, I don't even think that's simping. I think
I'm
that's just
just
standing up for
I'm
your
just
players, and I think
playing.
that's cool. You want to get into the NA performances as a whole? Like, I know we talked about each team a little bit, but let's get into it just a little bit. The overall from each team. Let's not take too long on this because we are already an hour into the episode. But let's talk about it a little bit. Who do you want to start with? TL?
Yeah, I know a lot of the. I guess I just want to talk in a bit of a broader sense to start out with, I guess, in terms of like
Yes.
getting out
Yeah.
of groups and NA performing as a whole. Like I feel like people really jumped on the bandwagon of like that TSM's performances was like TSM's performances was the viewpoint of the entire NA region because when after TSM went 06, everyone was like, "Oh my God, this is a complete abomination." NA's performances at Worlds have been so bad, and like people are digging up stats from like NA's combined record at Worlds and how they perform in groups and yada yada yada. And they kind of forget that TL and FlyQuest they went a respectable 3-3 in groups that they were not projected to make it out in. They made it competitive. They won some big games, and I feel like a lot of people sort of jumped on this bandwagon of NA is so bad after the TSM 06 and really
Hmm.
weren't, maybe they pigeonholed themselves too early into this idea that TSM is so, or sorry, NA is so bad internationally because of how TSM performed.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think honestly, I think like we came into this knowing full well there was a good chance that North American teams weren't going to get out of groups. This isn't any surprise to anyone. Maybe '06 is a surprise, but the end result of no NA teams moving on is pretty much what we expected. And
Hmm.
I think to your point, I think TSM or pardon me, TL and FlyQuest actually did look good and had a good showing. And so I do think that there should be more credit given to them rather than hate given to North America just because TSM did bad. And I understand TSM is North Americans team, honestly. Like they are the team that people will focus on when they think of North America. So I understand why it's kind of over like clouded, so to speak. But regardless, again, I think that fans should be proud of how TL and FlyQuest did in groups that they had no business being competitive in.
Hmm.
Um, what else did you want to talk about in this one?
Well, the only other thing that I was thinking was another thing that I saw a lot on Twitter and Reddit, where people sort of like people would like when people talked about NA performances at World, people would always bring up Cloud9 as a response to, oh, hey, this is how NA, you know, they always seem to do well at international tournaments, and then people also took the viewpoint of, oh, it's like TL FlyQuest go 3-3 at Worlds, and the other NA team doesn't make it out. NA's so dog shit. And then there's
Yeah.
the other viewpoint that, oh, C9 goes 3-3, makes it out. NA did so well internationally, and I saw a lot of this comments, a lot of these comments talking about like 3-3 records at Worlds with, C9. They've made it out of group stage at Worlds, going 3-3 a couple times now. Whereas we've seen a ton of situations with TSM and TL going 3-3 and failing to make it out. And I guess to respond to that, like the main thing that you got to think of with Team Liquid is, or I guess with a lot of NA teams in general, is that you need to always beat the teams that are below you. In the majority of scenarios where an NA team has not made it out and they've been like so close to making it out, it's because they aren't winning the games that you're supposed to win. TL,
Yeah.
we saw like if they beat Machi, there's a three-way tie for first place, and who knows? TL makes it out first seed in this group. You look back to TSM in 2017. If they beat Flash Wolves, who was 0-5 at the time, they make it out of that group, tie breaking for first place against WE. Whereas you take a look at teams like Cloud9, where pretty much every international competition they go to, they always beat the team you're supposed to beat, and it's all about contending against those stronger teams. The only time I guess where that didn't happen was like the time where they started out 3-0 in season 5 and then they didn't make it out of the group. But in 2016 when they were in a group with IMA, I think it was Flash Wolves and SKT. They beat IMA twice, they beat Flash Wolves twice, and they lost to SKT twice. Um, or I don't know, maybe they went 1-1 against Flash Wolves and they did a tiebreaker, but then beat them in the tiebreaker. But
I'm not the guy to remember. I can't help you
yeah,
here.
just
Too
whatever.
long ago.
But then again, like C9 in 2017, where they win their 2 games against AHQ, go 1-1 against EDG, and lose 2-0 to SKT. Or you look at 2019 or 2018, where they beat Vitality 2 times. They went 1-1 against Gen G and 1-1 against RNG. And when you take a look back at all these previous NA performances, many times it's situations where teams are not winning the games that they're supposed to win. They come out and they throw up a fucking stinker to some bad team in comparison to them at the time. And I think one thing that, I'm seeing all these complaints about like NA, like they're not getting out of groups going 3-3, but you need to go to Worlds and perform and beat the teams you're supposed to beat, and then it's all about can you beat these juggernaut teams like G2, like Damwon, like Top Esports, like DRX. And I don't know. It just seems pretty ridiculous when all these people are like flaming this idea that Cloud9 versus the rest of NA when it comes to Worlds. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from. Did you want to talk a little bit about the pool seating and stuff like that? Do you want to get into that about North America a little bit?
Yeah. I guess to follow that up, there's like a ton of talk on Reddit and Twitter about like reseeding NA in terms of like their number of teams at Worlds or how they should be viewed as like Pool 1, Pool 2, and Pool 3 in terms of drawing for group stages. And I don't know, I'm not really buying into a lot of that talk. I don't know. You start us off with that.
Yeah, so I'm of the opinion that I need to hear what the alternative is going to look like if NA doesn't get a pool one seed. If there's talk that NA doesn't deserve a pool one seed, okay, well, how are they going to change the format to for someone else to get that seed, and who's it going to be, and all that? That's what I need to hear first. I could totally see the argument that NA's number one seed will never be as good as Europe's or Korea's or China's. Sure, but what's the alternative? And until there's an alternative to me that makes sense, I don't see any reason to change that. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I think the problem is when they did have that style of format back in 20, I think of 2016, when that was the year that G2 completely failed at MSI and lost EU their Pool 1 seed for the World Championship, and G2 was the number 1 seed out of Europe, but was actually a Pool 2 team, and both the two European teams ended up being Pool 2 teams. But you can't really do that format anymore with the LMS having disbanded because there's no other region that's considered a major region. The only other thing that
Mm-hmm.
could be possible in that case, which it actually wouldn't work, would be to give the VCS a pool 1 seed, but I don't think that like the VCS pool 1 seed like would be any better than the NA number 1 seed. In terms of like potentially finding a fix, I think the only way that would be possible would be to either change up the group stage format completely by having either more or less groups, or you do some sort of like you change up the format, but you also have some sort of best of 3, best of 5, I guess like games for the pool 1 teams. Like let's just say I'm gonna go completely hypothetical and I'm just spitting this off the top of my head here. Let's say you have EU number 1 seed, EU number 2 seed, LPL number 1 seed, LPL number 2 seed, LCK number 1 seed, LCK number 2 seed, NA number 1 seed, NA number 2 seed. So you have 8 teams, therefore into 4 groups, and those teams play a best of whatever series. Winner goes on and is, a first seed in a group, and you maybe there's some sort of way you play that out to where like I don't know, like then there's a scenario where LCK number 1 team and 2 team are considered pool 1 teams, LPL number 1 team is considered a pool 1 team, and EU number 1 team is considered a pool 1 team. I don't know. That'd be my only like potential suggestion, but it'd have to be something like restructuring the group stage or adding in some other like these additional games to prove like which team is better than which, and if you deserve like a pool one spot. I have no clue how you'd fix it.
I, So I think one of the biggest issues when it comes to these hypothetical formats, and maybe it should be this way, is maybe it should be this way, is that anytime that these ideas come up, it's we always kind of assume that the number one seed from Europe is going to be this strong, and the number two is going to be this strong. Like we kind of have this preset idea of how strong a seed should be, but it just doesn't work that way. Year over year, things are going to change. The number one seed out of Europe last year versus this year, no doubt. I think last year's G2 was better than this year's G2. I don't think it's even close. Same thing with North America. And so even this year we had a fourth seed from Europe show up, and I think people were expecting that seed to be better. So I think the issue is that you have all these preconceived notions of how teams are supposed to perform if they're a one, a two, or three, or a four seed, but then like nothing ever really goes to expectations, and so you set up this format thinking that teams should be this strong or that strong, but the point is that the formats, even though they're set up a certain way, you can't expect it to follow through in the same way. And so that's why I think it's always like you're never going to have a perfect format because the teams are always fluctuating in how good or bad they are by the time the world comes around, and just year over year it changes. So I don't think there is such thing as a perfect format, and I don't think that we're going to see. I don't think that we're going to be happy with the format for a long, long time, honestly.
Yeah,
But
I,
who knows? It's too hard to predict the future, honestly.
I just feel like with the number of teams, it's pretty difficult to be able to change up the format in a major way and expect the results to be different. I feel like with the number of teams that there are and the level of play that we constantly see with, you know, there are just some teams that are just so much better than other teams. Like you take a look at like traditional sports and think there's like a lot more upset potential in traditional sports as there is in esports in like a best of format. Like in esports, it's really hard to win a best of five being the weaker team. Yes, it's happened. Yes, we've seen it happen. But in most case scenarios, the better team wins out in a best of five.
Yeah,
Best of one is a completely different question, and best of ones, anything is up for
yeah.
grabs. But unless like there's more teams or there's like a complete different like if there's a complete change up to the format, I don't think there's any minor adjustments that will have some major outcome changes.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Is there anything else on that before we move on to our little preview of the quarterfinals?
Uh, no, I think that's it.
All right, so we got quarterfinals coming up. To me, this is where the like honestly, don't get me wrong, I love group stage. It's also where we always get to see North America at Worlds, but I think the games get a lot more competitive and a lot more exciting when it comes to quarterfinals. So even with NA not being in them, I think this is where Worlds actually does get a little bit more exciting. Let's start with Damwon and DRX because they are the first game. They're on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, right? Thursday at like 6 a.m. EST, 3 a.m. PST, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep,
Let's
I'm
go with that for now.
I'm just
Um,
pulling up the pick'ems on screen. Plus, it gives the schedule sort of.
Yeah, yeah, go for it. Yeah, we made our full pickums. We're only going to do predictions for. I mean, you could see if you're watching on the screen, you could see what our pickums are for the rest of the tournament. But we're only going to be predicting the series, like number of games won for like the quarterfinals, and then next week we'll do semis, and then following that we'll do the finals. Um, for now, let's start with Damwon because even though the brackets like it's got Damwon and DRX at the bottom, they are the first game on Thursday. I got Damwon taking the series 3-2. I kind of did mine, and I think you may have done the same, where I kind of went player by player, and I wanted to see like who I think has the advantage. For Damwon, I gave the advantage to Nuguri in the top lane. I actually put the jungle as even. I think before the tournament started, I would have said Canyon over Piosik, but I think they've both looked good in this tournament. Same thing with Showmaker and Chovy. I probably would have said Chovy before the tournament starts, but I thought that they've both looked very good as well. And I think Chovy still has a little bit more to show, but I think they've been equal as well. And then I gave the advantage to Deft over Ghost and to Barrel over Carria. So I think that this is going to be a really even series, and that's why I ultimately went 3-2. I like what I've seen out of DRX, but I like what I've seen out of Damwon just a little bit more.
Yeah, while I do think that individually the players are a lot closer, like it's very close individually. I just think that Damwon overall as a team, they just seem super polished. They're just a more aggressive version of DRX, and I see this series being more of like a 3-0 or a 3-1. Ultimately, I'm gonna go with 3-1 because I definitely do think there's a world where DRX gets um, either Damwon fumbles in the early game or DRX gets their perfect sort of mid game to late game composition. But I just think that Damwon is just a better version of DRX, and I think it's pretty hard to actually see a world where DRX comes out on top of the series. While I do think they're very, very good, I just think that Damwon's a better, cleaner, more aggressive version of them.
Yeah, and so just to preface as well, I need to admit that I did not watch that much LCK this year, and so all my analysis is based off what I've seen at Worlds. However, I have heard a lot of analysts say that Damwon was hands down the best team in Korea, and that the 2 and 3 being DRX and Genji were more close. So I know that there's probably a lot of people going in with more information than I have about how this series should go, and it is interesting that like all the Korean teams are on one side and all the Chinese teams are on
Yeah, it
the
was
other,
really,
kind of,
yeah.
or rather, they're all eliminating themselves, is what I guess is what I'm trying to say. It is a weird bracket, honestly, and it is also weird when you have teams that know each other a lot more. Like let's put it this way: after this tournament, uh, if FlyQuest or TL were to play against TSM, if you all you did was watch Worlds, you would take FlyQuest or TL over TSM. But we just saw TSM beat both of them towards the end of playoffs in summer. So I think that there's a little bit of extra information that people that the hardcore LCK fans have going into this tournament. But again, based off what we've seen so far at this tournament, I think both these teams look really good, and I think it'll be a great series.
Yeah, just, I mean, just if you didn't know, in spring, Damwon and DRX played best of five in the third round of LCK playoffs, and Damwon won 3-2, and Damwon DRX played in the finals in summer, and Damwon 3-0'd them. So
Yeah.
I definitely agree that, Damwon is not necessarily heavily favored, but they're definitely favored over DRX. I think they just have like a general mental advantage after beating them in two best of fives this year, and I don't see it changing.
Yeah, for me, I think the standout player for DRX is going to have to be Piosik, and then the standout player for Damwon, I think, is going to have to be Nugri. These are the guys that I think really have stepped up so far, and they're going to need to continue to do that. Just because their counterpart, like even though they've stepped up and they've looked good, each of their counterparts have also looked really good. Nugri, of course, going up against Doran, and then Piosik going up against Canyon. Yeah, great matchups, almost honestly from top down. So really good series. Anything else before we move on to Suning and JDG?
Nope.
Okay, Suning JDG. I got 3-2 Suning in this one. And I know this is very similar to what I just said, where I said it's interesting with a bunch of people coming in with prior knowledge, having watched Summer. I did not watch a lot of LPL. And so, again, all of this is based off what I have seen at Worlds. And I do think that Suning has been the better team overall. Even though I know JDG finished higher than them in the LPL, I think Suning has just been honestly clearly better. Regardless, though, because I know JDG is still a good team, and I am expecting to see more out of Kanavi and Yagao. I actually just have this being a 3-2, so I'm taking Suning in this one. I think Bin has been absolutely nuts, and I think SOM FM has also been pretty crazy, very, very aggressive. I think that matchup in the jungle is going to be really, really exciting. SOFM versus Kanavi.
Yeah, for me, the main reason why I ended up going Suning on this one was specifically because of jungle and what I've seen out of SOFM and subsequently what I've seen out of Kanavi. It just seems like Kanavi is playing much more reserved and he's on a style of champion that we haven't seen him as much on from what we saw in the LPL. I still think he's been playing all right. It's just I don't think his play style is not the best when he's playing these uh, less aggressive AP junglers. And you know, SOFM has been playing really, really nuts. He's definitely one of the players. If there was like a group stage MVP sort of award, he'd be, I think, in consideration for that. He
Yeah.
he played really insane. He's like the spark for Suning in terms of, well, I mean, if it's not him, it's Ben. He's another player who I think, everyone would assume that JDG has a large advantage in the top lane with Zoom, but Ben has just really showed up. Like I was mentioning before, I really like the play style that he's going with, pretty much just fighting you 24/7 and really testing the limits on his champion. If he's playing some sort of 1v1 split push kind of champion in like Jax, Irelia, or Gangplank, I think that Suning's bot lane, Huangfeng and Sword Art, they've looked really, really good, really solid, pretty only against G2 have they really like made mistakes in the laning phase. I think they've looked really good. They match up pretty well to Loken and Lu. I think it's just Lumao. I don't think it's LV Mao. I think it's
Lumao.
Lumao.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's Lumao.
Um, but I think the X factor in that is really just the mid lane. I think whatever mid lane wins will probably end up winning. And I think Yagao and Angel have both been kind of there. They haven't really been like the main catalyst for the team. Like,
Catalyst, nice.
yeah, I've been using that word recently a little bit. Y'all Lambton fools know what I mean by the catalyst.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I actually put Angel and Yagao as even. I didn't
Yeah.
weight it one side or the other. I think that they've both been good, but not absolutely stellar, and so I don't think there's any reason to give the advantage to one side or the other. I think that they still both have more to prove in this tournament, and so I think that's going to be an exciting matchup.
Yeah, the thing for Yagao, which I'm finding a little interesting, it's not as much of, but his champion pool is he's definitely running a bit of an unconventional champion pool to the majority of champions that we're seeing. I don't want to like compare him to Doinby at all because Doinby had his really like his own unique play style on playing mid and really popularized this roam and shove meta in mid lane. But he's definitely on a bit more um, off meta champions. He's playing. He loves the Echo and Syndra counter matchup. He's playing the early aggressive champion in Jace. And I think, like I said before, I think mid lane, whoever has the advantage mid lane will win this tournament. And it's really hard to judge right now between Angel and Yagao.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, I completely agree. I think it's going to be good. I also gave I went even with Huan Feng and Loken as well. Another matchup where I think both guys have showed up and they've looked really good, and I think either of them can carry their team. I did give Lumao the advantage over Sword Art though, and it's nothing against Sword Art. I just think Lumao has been great. He roams a lot, has a lot of impact, a lot of impact on laning phase. Without being in his own lane, so really, really good to see him doing that, and I think that's one of the reasons that JDG will be able to scrape a couple of wins by. However, I did have Bin and SOFM as the favorites over their counterparts in that one. Anything else before we move on to TES versus Fnatic?
No.
So TES versus Fnatic, that'll be the Saturday game. I don't know if we mentioned it, but the Friday game will be the Suning JDG one. The Saturday game though, or the Saturday best of five rather. I got TES taking the 3-0. This isn't really a huge shot at Fnatic. It's more that I think TES still has a lot to show, and I think that they just have advantages in every lane. It's not that I think Whippo's bad. It's that I think 369 is great. And it's not that I think Selfmade's bad. I think he's also great, but I think Karsa has not gotten enough credit for how good he has looked in the tournament. I actually gave him the advantage as well, which might come as a surprise to a lot of people. I just think the reason why Karsa hasn't been like shining so bright is more so because everybody else on the team is looking really good. Like Jackie Love has been insane. I think he's been the best AD carry so far at the tournament. A lot of
Hmm.
people were expecting it to be Ruler, but I think Jackie Love has been the best. So I gave him the advantage over Reckless. I obviously gave Knight the advantage over Nemesis. The only place for is where I gave the advantage to Fnatic is in the support role. I gave Hilly Sang a little bit of an edge over Yu Yanja. I think Hilly Sang's been the best we've seen him all year. And I think that the level ones have been a really big part. And I didn't even know, like you mentioned earlier, how a lot of the talk is that Hilly Sang is prepping the level ones. I didn't even know that, but you could see it in their gameplay that he's been so good level one. And so I think that that's one of the reasons we've seen success out of Fnatic. However, I don't think it's going to be enough for them to stop top esports from just running over them. So I gave top the 3-0.
Yeah, this one for me is I have this one much closer actually. I think this is the best that Fnatic has looked since their season 8 Worlds run. They
Okay.
obviously have a much difficulter path this year than they did the previous year, going up against, third seed LPL and EDG, and then up against Cloud9 in the semifinals before getting absolutely demolished by IG in the finals. But I feel like people might view this matchup as somewhat similar to that best of five against IG, where you're going up against, one of the best Chinese teams in top esports. But if Fnatic stay on this current form that they've shown, I think this is actually a very competitive series. Fnatic is a team that is sort of similar to G2 in the fact that they will go down fighting. They won't attempt to just like stop making plays and completely lose tempo of the game when they start getting behind. They're sort of similar to G2, like I said, in the fact that they like to keep fighting. The games will get bloody. If they lose, the game will be lost in fast and like stompy fashion. But I do think that, Fnatic has shown really intelligent drafting and level one strategy and then transitioning that into sort of like an on the fly game plan that they're creating, like that game against Gen G where Fnatic they get that early kill and then they end up just completely playing around bot lane with bringing Selfmade to dive the turret at level 2, level 3. We saw that in their exact same game against LGD where they got that Really, really good level one fight against LGG's bot lane, and then turned that into a self-made dive at level three. We did see, they did that dive again right after, and LGD did punish that. But I actually was watching another Fnatic video where there was their voice comms for that game, and they did say like it's probably going to be int if they dive the tower, and they ended up inting it, and they gave LGD like 3 kills. But I think this series is a lot closer than most people would say. I don't think you can underestimate Fnatic at all if you're top esports. I think Fnatic's actually playing really, really well. I have this series as like a 3-1. I honestly wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw this series as a 3-2, but I'm
Okay.
going 3-1 TES on this one. I think
Okay.
it'll be a competitive whatever number of games it is, whether it's a 3-0, whether it's a
Yeah.
3-2, it'll be competitive. It won't be just some stomp fest.
Yeah, I get what you're saying because there is a difference between a close 3-0 and a stomp 3-0. You're
Yeah.
basically saying that regardless of the score line, you think it's going to be a close series if I'm getting you right, right?
Yep.
Okay, that's totally fair. Yeah, really exciting series. I'm looking forward to seeing Fnatic because, like I said, I do think that they're at the best we've seen them all year. Let's also not forget this was a team that finished 9-9 in summer split. By the way, they were not looking that good, and you wouldn't even know that you're watching the same team because I do agree with you. They have looked really good. But let's move
Hmm.
on to Gen G versus G2. This to me is the hardest one to predict. This is the series for me where I could see it going any scoreline. I could see 3-2 in one way. I could see 3-0 in one way, 3-0 in the other. I have Genji coming out 3-2 on top. I gave Wonder the advantage in the top lane, and then I gave Clid the advantage in the jungle. BDD, I put him behind Caps just a little bit, so I gave Caps the advantage. Ruler, I gave the advantage over Perks, and then Mickey, I gave the advantage over Life. So even though I actually do have more advantages to the side of G2, the reason why I went with Gen G is I think their advantages or their we'll say advantages for lack of a better term. I think theirs are much greater. Like I think Clid has been much better than Yankos, and I think Ruler has been much better than Perks. Despite Perks having that one really good performance on the Senna, I still don't have that much confidence in him. I need to see more than one really good Senna game with 140 stacks before I give him the keys to the car, so to speak. Yeah, I just think that the gaps are really good for Gen G's side, and I think that they'll be able to abuse. I also don't think that in the roles where I did give the advantages, being top, mid, and support, I don't think it's by a landslide for G2. But again, this is going to be a really fun series. I think both these teams are really fun to watch. I've said all tournament long, I think G2 is the most fun team to watch because of their volatility. And so this is a series that I don't think anyone's going to want to miss. And this one is the Sunday series.
I, however, have this one in favor of G2. I have it as a 3-1 for G2. They're kind of just, I guess, now known as like the LCK killers. Like we were talking about earlier, it's pretty funny how the bracket worked out, where it's all LPL on one side plus Fnatic, it's all LCK on the other side plus G2. Um, just like it's pretty hard to ignore that G2 beat, two LCK teams 3-1 at the previous World Championship to go to the finals. Yes, obviously G2 is not the same team, but I do
Yeah, you
think
knew what
that,
I was going to say,
well,
didn't you?
yeah, but I just think that even though G2 is playing much worse, I still think their style matches up really well against all of the LCK teams. You can see in my pick'ems, I actually have G2 going to the finals. Even though they, would in fact, if G2 wins and Damwon win, would go against, one of the pre-tournament favorites in Damwon. I just think that G2 has a really good style um, compared to the LCK. I think the only team that has a chance against G2, being an LCK team, is Damwon because they are much more aggressive in the early game. But we have, like, I'm kind of going all over the place here, but like I did mention previously, I was not very impressed by Genji in the group stage. Uh, they went 5-1. However, I didn't think that it was a very strong 5-1. They should have lost that game against TSM, where TSM just hand wrapped on a bow with a silver platter, whatever the hell you want to say. They just gifted the win to Genji after throwing at Baron. They had two very close games against LGD, which I think could have gone either way. And then we're talking about a team in Gen G who's anywhere between 2-4 and 4-2. And I don't think they've looked very good. I think they had their two games against Fnatic. One they got stomped. One they stomped Fnatic. I think Gen G, they're just a little bit too slow for G2. I just see the series going if G2 is able to, like we mentioned before, play their style and have an up-tempo gameplay where they're just taking it to Gen G. I just see G2 kind of running over this series.
And that's fair. Again, I said that I could see this series going anyway. Last week on Hotline League, I said that I think G2 is going to make an early exit. I did not think that they would be playing Genji. I think they definitely high rolled on that.
Yeah,
However,
I
again,
agree with that.
I think that they still I still think they will lose to Genji, but again, yeah, this is going to be a good series. I but yeah, they let's be honest, they lucked out that they dodged top
And damn one.
and damn one.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
come on, man.
for sure.
So that's something that really went for their way. But I mean, hey, that's the way it goes, right? And regardless, if you want to win the whole thing, you got to get through everyone some way or another, anyway. So, yeah, that's how it's going to go. I do, before we close out on this section, I do want to highlight for our listeners that can't see the full pickums, just who we got going to win the world championship. JNT, for those that have the screen up, he's got TES taking the world championship against G2, and I got Damwon over Suning. Yes, a lot of people are going to be surprised that I put Suning going to the finals. I just think they've looked really good, and I think Damwon has looked better. So I don't think we need to dive too much into that, but just for people wondering who we got winning it all, right now I got Damwon, and he's got TES. Uh, let's move on to some quick news before we close out the show. There's not a lot of quick news, but some interesting things. First, I want to talk about 100 Thieves. People are going to say that this isn't all that relevant, but hear me out. 100 Thieves actually decided today, I think it was, that they're going to let go of their CS:GO roster. And you might say, well, what the hell does that have to do with anything of League of Legends? Well, 100 Thieves has a budget, and when they came into the LCS, they had a very big budget for their players, and then they wanted to scale back the next year because they thought, you know what, maybe we spent too much on players, maybe we should budget a little bit better. Well, now they don't really have a budget going towards the CS:GO roster, which, by the way, costs a lot of money, and so you have to wonder if some of that budget will be freed up for the LCS, and that's why I think that it's relevant here. I think that even before they let go of a CS:GO roster, I think that there was a good chance that 100 Thieves was going to spend a little bit more to try to get some better players. And I think that with the CS:GO roster going away, I think that there's even more a chance of that happening. One little caveat, though, is that I did hear rumors, or maybe it's not even a rumor anymore. Maybe it's just fact that they will be joining the Call of Duty League. I'm not 100% on that, but if they do join the Call of Duty League, obviously that's going to come with a cost as well and could hold them back from spending more on LCS pros. But something to keep in mind, I think that in the next year, we're going to learn a lot about where the priorities of 100 Thieves are at as far as how much they want to spend on their LCS roster. So right now is a really interesting time for 100 Thieves fans, and I think that them letting go of their CS:GO roster is very relevant to 100 Thieves fans. So we wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I think we'll have to see how it does affect their, if they do want to spend more on their league team. There definitely will be a lot of changes in their league team. We'll have to see whether or not they stick with Poom and contracts for starting positions. The team is pretty much built around Someday. Honestly, I would expect 100 Thieves to have a completely different roster going into 2021.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see them, spend big on, important positions like mid, like jungle. And we'll have to see. But in terms of like their priorities, I think their priorities, honestly, are not esports related. I think they're just like apparel and streaming. I think that's
And
where
that's
the
what they've
team,
gotten a lot of
yeah,
criticism for, right? And fairly so. They have gotten a lot of criticism because it did seem like they completely let go of how much they wanted to budget for being competitive, and they went a lot more of the fashion route. So honestly, I think that's fair criticism.
yeah, I know. I remember Papa Smithy. When he came in as a GM role, he did talk about how he wanted to find that sort of middle ground of being a competitive team while also being, financially stable and finding, finding some young potential talent to utilize in their LCS team. Like they brought over Ryoma from OPL, who, let's be honest here, in the end, it didn't work out. He wasn't up to par with the LCS, mid lane level. But one thing that I do think they're doing right is developing talent. We're seeing them bringing up now a couple of their 100 Thieves Next players into their academy team. I remember their top laner Tenacity and their jungler, whose name I forget, but they have a jungler on that 100 Thieves Next team who they're bringing up to academy. Kenvi, that's his name.
Oh, I know this.
Kenvi.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
And they did have Poom, who was on their 100 next team, who went from pretty much just skipped all his way and starting LCS. I'd like to see him back in academy, but I do think in terms
I
of
think in
their,
all likeliness he will be in academy.
yeah,
Honestly, right? I think that makes sense.
but I do think that 100 Thieves is sort of, yes, maybe they won't be super successful in the LCS now, but they're kind of setting themselves up for the future, which I think is good.
Yeah, and honestly, just one other quick note on the 100 Thieves thing is that with the Oceanic region being North America now, maybe Ryoma doesn't go back to the OPL and maybe he just goes to Academy.
Well, you can't
So
go back to the
I
OPL.
mean, hey, well, yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Because I think that was the thought. The thought was that Ryoma would go back to the OPL after he didn't exactly work out in the LCS. But I think now he's got reason to stay in North America, and maybe he can still develop in the academy scene. But I mean, that's remained to be seen. Next up on some quick news, the other thing I saw was a certain tweet by a certain GM from a certain LCS team, that being CLG Tafo Kintz or something like that is his name. Um, he tweeted out basically like, "Hey, if there's any OCE players or coaches looking to join a team, hit me up," or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the tweet was. All I have to say about this is I hope to God that that is not the extent of their efforts on trying to recruit Oceanic players. I like, please tell me that that is not your effort. If I see CLG with another awful roster this year and they try to sell it to their fans that they made an effort to reach out to Oceanic players to find talent, I am going to rage because that is. And hey, maybe they did also reach out in person, but that is not the way you reach out to players and coaches. You should have scouts and you should be able to reach out to players that you know have talent. That's what scouts are for. You should be able to say, "Hey, look, this guy has a lot of promise. Let's look into him. Let's contact him." Not let's send out a tweet and hope people get back to us. I hope that if they sent out that tweet, that that is not the extent of their efforts to get Oceanic players. We do enough flaming of CLG on this podcast, though. So, God damn it, they don't help themselves, though.
maybe
But I'm gonna
2021 will
try
be
to leave it
different
at
for
that, so I
CLG.
don't need to flame them anymore.
Maybe 2021 will be different for
Let's hope to
CLG.
God. I want to cheer for that team next year, man.
Nope, I don't.
Give me something to cheer for. I don't even care if the roster is bad. I want to be able to cheer for CLG to see that they made an effort to actually field a decent team. If they make some risks and the team turns out bad, excuse me, I won't be disappointed. But if they just signed a bunch of shitty old LCS players and then they say that they tried to recruit from Oceania and all I see is this tweet, I'm going to be pretty upset. But nonetheless, let's put that aside. Unless you got anything else on that.
Nope.
Okay, let's put that aside. And the last thing that I got for a quick news is just the Broxa. There was a Broxa tweet. And also he did an interview with Travis Gafford, also a really good interview. The things of note, we'll put these things in the description, but the things of note in his tweet was that he had the old LEC jungler Cold help him out a little bit. He said that he basically was coaching him. I'm paraphrasing here, of course. But I thought this was really interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it raises the question of, does that mean Broxa doesn't trust his coaches? That could be a total stretch. I need to put that out there. Like maybe he just wanted a little bit of extra help and like maybe his coaches are fine, but maybe he thinks that Cold knows his playstyle really well and can help him. So Cold was helping him out on the world stage, and it makes me also wonder if maybe TL looks to hire him if Broxa does happen to go back to Team Liquid. In the interview with Travis, Travis asks him, "Hey, look, do you think you're going to be coming back to North America?" And he didn't say one way or another. He did, however, say that he wouldn't rule out Europe or North America. So I think that the options are definitely on the table. I don't think that he's done with North America by the sounds of things, but it's really hard to get a gauge of just what his intentions are. However, he did say that even though he did receive some hate from North American fans, he got a lot of support from a lot of other North American fans, and that no, he is not afraid of going back to North America. And so I do think that he will kind of look at what his options are for 2021. And I think that there is a fair chance we see him back in North America. And if we do, who knows? Maybe Cold comes over to be a jungle coach for him here in NA. But yeah, just some noteworthy stuff. I thought that that was pretty interesting. And again, we will provide links for these things in the description. Anything on that, JNT, before we close out the show?
Yeah, I think I'd like Broxa to stay in NA. I think
Me too.
he definitely it'd be disappointing to see him leave after, what on all accounts would I guess be considered a failure coming to NA with having Team Liquid's like their ninth place finish in spring, then finishing third or being NA's third seed going to Worlds and then not making it out of groups. I would definitely want to see them give another go with this whole Team Liquid roster. I think this whole roster should play out next season again for sure. I think Tactical is integrated really well in as AD carry. I think Jet's done a really great job with Team Liquid, and I don't want to see any more changes. I want to see this roster stick it out another year and see what they can accomplish. I definitely I'd rather a team stick together for an extra year and give it another go than sub in a different piece and potentially having to go through like a mini like rebuilding and gathering back synergy sort of phase.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And honestly, I'm just such a huge Broxa fan, man. I've mentioned this before, but he's actually just so classy, and he does make the league better on and off the Rift, is what I've been saying over and over again. I just think it's so true, and I think it would be really sad for North America to lose him, just because I don't know. I think he's just had a great impact on the league, even if he wasn't the best jungler in the league, he was still solid. And yeah, I don't know. I just like to see more wholesome players in the league. He's got a really good attitude, and I think that he has a really great way of working with his teammates, and you could just tell that just in interviews he's very classy. So big Broxa fan I am, and I want to see him back. But that's going to do it for us this episode. Some quick shout outs. Follow us on Twitter at Toominator, TOOMINATOR underscore, and at BlueJ underscore GG. Please give us a follow on there. We will do our best to be more active on Twitter, as I say every episode. And also be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you're listening on YouTube. We want them subs, so please do that. We appreciate the live viewers, especially the people that are active in chat. We always like to see that. And yeah, also remember we are available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Should that interest you, we actually have had a lot better viewership on those platforms than I think we initially expected. So shout out to all those people that listen on those platforms as well. Anything else, J&T, before we close out?
Now that's it. Shout out to all the people listening.
Okay, do we have an idea of when we want to do our next episode this week? Last week we kind of lied. We said Sunday night and then we kind of did it Monday. Do we have an idea of when next week's episode's going
I
to be?
think we should probably. I know games are happening Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I think we should just stick with the Monday.
Okay, we'll look to, as of right now, everyone, we will aim for Monday. I know last week we said we'd aim for Sunday, but for now it will be aiming for Monday. And of course, if that's different, just follow us on Twitter and you'll hear that. You'll hear when we are going live. We'll tweet out. So yeah, make sure to follow us there. Thanks again for listening. Always much appreciated to all of you. We love you so much. And this has been episode 19 of the Clown Fiesta podcast.